They killed her on a Tuesday. Marcus Hale didn't see it happen, but he knew the time down to the minute, 12:04 Galactic Standard. Because every human on Station Vega heard the crackle of the emergency channel and the clipped alien command that followed. He had been sitting in a diplomatic lounge, waiting for clearance to board a shuttle home, when the news slid across the comms in cold, mechanical bursts. Civilian quarters breached, all personnel terminated. Incident deemed regrettable. No names, no faces, just the neat, clinical certainty of a life erased. They didn't know she was his wife. Now, standing in the vaulted reception hall of the Zorathi Imperial Court, Marcus smiled as if none of that had ever happened. His smile was the polite, disarming kind a man might wear to a neighbor's barbecue, warm enough to pass for genuine, unhurried enough to hide the blade behind it. He adjusted his cufflinks, even though they didn't need adjusting, and let his eyes travel up the alien architecture like he was admiring the curves of a cathedral. "General Hale," the herald intoned, his voice a reverberating hiss in the strange acoustics. "Welcome to the court of His Imperial Majesty." Marcus inclined his head, just enough to look deferential, without actually being so. "An honor," he said, the vowels rounded with deliberate calm. "I've heard so much about your hospitality." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled nobles, most of them tall, plated creatures with eyes that gleamed like wet obsidian. Hospitality, in Zorathi parlance, was a flexible word. The one who stepped forward was unmistakable. Prince Velrock, heir to the throne, swathed in iridescent robes that shifted color with every step. His mouth curled in what the Zorathi called a smile, but which on a human face would have looked more like the start of a snarl. "So this is the human hero we've been promised," Velrock said, his tone pitched for the gallery. "The one who believes his people are ready for civilized conversation." Marcus offered his hand in greeting. The prince did not take it. "I'm ready for many things, Your Highness," Marcus replied mildly. "Civilized conversation is just one of them." The court chuckled at the faint impertinence. Velrock studied him for a beat longer than necessary, as if trying to place the exact shape of the threat he was looking at. Then he turned, gesturing for Marcus to follow. The walk to the inner chambers was a theater piece in itself. Columns carved with the victories of past emperors, tapestries depicting alien conquests, guards stationed like living statues along the route. Marcus absorbed it all, storing details in the quiet backroom of his mind where strategy lived. The air smelled faintly metallic, like a room that had seen blood cleaned too many times. A second figure joined them halfway, older, slower, his robes less ostentatious, but his gaze sharper. Advisor Tvar, if Marcus's briefing was right. The kind of man, alien, who read every footnote before signing anything. "General Hale," Tvar said, his voice a measured scrape. "You've traveled far for these talks." "I have," Marcus said, and left it there. They reached the council chamber, an oval room with a table grown. Yes, grown, out of some living crystal. Marcus took the seat offered, noting the arrangement. Velrock opposite him, Tvar slightly to the side, close enough to observe, far enough to disavow. The rest of the court fanned out along the periphery, like vultures waiting for something to drop dead. "I trust your accommodations were adequate?" Velrock asked. "More than adequate," Marcus said pleasantly. "I even had a view of the city. Fascinating architecture. Every building looks like it's leaning toward something it wants to devour." That drew a few low chuffs of amusement. The prince smirked, perhaps deciding this human was just arrogant enough to be entertaining. "We are here," Velrock said, "to discuss the recent misunderstandings between our peoples." Marcus folded his hands on the table. "I'm glad we're in agreement about the need to avoid further regrets." A silence stretched, long enough for the word to settle. The Zorathi didn't like euphemisms. They preferred blunt force. Marcus used them like scalpels. Velrock leaned forward. "Earth's colonies have been expanding into contested space." "Your maps contest a lot of space," Marcus said, still smiling, "including systems you haven't set foot in for 300 years. The prince's eyes narrowed. Tvar's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the faintest flick of an ear, the alien equivalent of interest. The discussion meandered through trade routes, border patrols, mineral rights. Marcus conceded nothing, yet never raised his voice. He parried with history, with precedent, with offers so lopsided in their apparent disadvantage to Earth that a casual observer might have thought him incompetent. The court, unused to human negotiation styles, began to smell weakness. Marcus let them. Between the formal points, he dropped little morsels. A story about an Earth fishing village that survived 3 centuries of storms by tying their boats together in the harbor. A joke about a chess player who wins by losing pieces no one thought valuable. Each anecdote sounded harmless. Each was a coded reminder that humans thrived in chaos and didn't mind bleeding to win. When refreshments arrived, a tray of steaming liquid in delicate glassware, Marcus accepted his cup without hesitation. He took a sip, grimaced, and said, "Reminds me of coffee from a vending machine at 2 in the morning." "What is vending machine?" Velrock asked, frowning. "A human device," Marcus said, swirling the cup. "It dispenses questionable liquid in exchange for currency. The drink tastes like regret, but it keeps you awake through the bad hours." Some of the court laughed. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing the barb under the humor. Velrock tried again to draw him out, probing for the edge. "Your people seem spirited. But spirit does not win wars against empires." Marcus set his cup down gently. "Empires fall, Highness. Sometimes it just takes the right Tuesday." It was a throwaway line to anyone who didn't know his history. Tavares' gaze sharpened. The meeting wound down with promises to reconvene. As they rose, Velrock made a show of extending his hand this time, as if granting a favor. Marcus took it. His grip was firm, his smile unchanged. On the way back to the guest wing, Tvar fell into step beside him. "You choose your words carefully, General." "I try," Marcus said. "Careful words can hide dangerous intentions." "They can," Marcus agreed, eyes forward. "Or they can keep dangerous truths from spilling too soon." They parted at the corridor junction. Marcus walked alone to his quarters, the echo of his steps steady against the ornate flooring. Inside, he loosened his tie, removed the cufflinks he'd fussed with earlier, and placed them on the desk. The tiny embedded lights blinked twice, signal received. From the outer balcony, the city spread like a web of glass and steel, each strand pulsing faintly with transit lines and energy grids. Marcus rested his hands on the railing, feeling the faint vibration of the shield dome above. Somewhere in that vast alien sprawl were the men who had carried out the order on Station Vega. Somewhere in this palace were the ones who had signed it. He spoke softly, almost conversationally, to no one in particular. Tuesdays have a way of coming around again. Behind him, the door chimed. A palace attendant entered with a tray of evening refreshments and a small hollow projector. "A gift from His Highness," the attendant said. The hollow projector flickered to life on the desk. Marcus expected a decorative display, perhaps a scenic view or a piece of alien art. Instead, the device projected a file header in Zorathi script, one his translation implant rendered instantly. "Military Archives, Operation Clean Sweep, Vega Colony." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. Just let the hum of the projector fill the room. His pulse stayed level. His eyes stayed calm. "Shall I delete after viewing?" the attendant asked politely. Marcus's smile was small, almost gentle. "No, keep it. I like to revisit old regrets." The attendant inclined his head and left. Marcus shut the balcony door, sealing the city out. He poured himself a drink from a tray, something amber and sharp, and sat with the file glowing before him. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he reached for his comm, keyed in a secure channel, and spoke 6 words in a voice that had no warmth left in it. "Phase 1 is in position. Wait." And then he shut the comm down, the hum of the projector still whispering the title of the file that had started it all. Tomorrow, the real conversation would begin. The banquet was a performance in every sense. The Zorathi served food like they waged war, excessively, with questionable tactics, and no concern for collateral damage. Plates arrived that steamed, sizzled, or pulsed faintly as if they were still thinking about escape. The table stretched nearly the length of a Terran soccer field, carved from a single piece of some living mineral that shimmered faintly under the chamber's pale light. Marcus Hale took his seat near the center, an apparent position of honor. He noticed immediately that it gave him a perfect view of both the royal dais and the main exits. Prince Velrock sat opposite, already basking in the admiration of courtiers. Admiral Xor, the Empire's military head, loomed to the prince's right, broad and armored in ceremonial plating that looked like it could stop a shell. His eyes swept Marcus with the same casual contempt one might reserve for an interesting insect. The first course arrived, a dish that smelled faintly of copper and ozone. Marcus poked at it with the alien equivalent of a fork. "Is it supposed to be humming?" A courtier laughed. "That is the sound of freshness, General." "Where I come from," Marcus said lightly, "if dinner hums, you call an electrician." Polite chuckles rippled around the table. Xor did not laugh. Velrock leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You humans find amusement in everything, even in war." Marcus lifted the utensil like a conductor's baton. "It's how we survive bad food and worse company." The line landed with just enough sugar to keep it from being outright insult. Still, Xor's eyes narrowed. Tvar, seated farther down, said nothing but watched closely. As the meal progressed, Marcus tried each dish, but only swallowed what he trusted. The rest he shifted discreetly to the plate of an overly talkative courtier beside him, who seemed delighted by the attention. Every swallow, every sip was measured, some to blend in, some to keep him alive. Between bites, the conversation shifted to politics, then to military posturing. Xor recounted an amusing incident in which Zorathi forces had disciplined a rebellious mining moon. Marcus smiled thinly. "And what's the going rate for peace under your discipline these days? Or is that more of a volume discount arrangement?" Velrock smirked at the verbal jab, but Xor's expression hardened. "You speak as if your people understand the cost of empire." Marcus set down his glass, fingers brushing the rim in a slow circle. "We do. We've paid it in blood often enough. Difference is we keep the receipt." Silence pooled across the table for a moment. Someone further down coughed. Whether from discomfort or the spice in their food was anyone's guess. Velrock gestured for the next course, breaking the tension. As attendance circulated, Marcus leaned back slightly, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceiling. The glimmering chandeliers, bioluminescent constructs, hung from anchor points that connected directly to the palace's central support struts. He catalogued each one without moving his head. From the corner of his vision, he caught a tiny flicker, a drone the size of a moth, skittering briefly along the molding before vanishing into the shadows. His people were inside. Good. Tvar's voice broke through his mental inventory. "General Hale, your people have a reputation for adaptability. I wonder, how do you measure victory?" Marcus offered a pleasant shrug. "Survival's a good metric. But sometimes, it's about making sure the other guy doesn't enjoy his win for long." Several courtiers exchanged glances, uncertain whether to laugh. Velrock's smile faltered for the briefest moment. Dessert arrived, something translucent and trembling. Marcus tapped it gently with his spoon. "Where I come from, we have a dessert like this. It's served to children." "Because it is sweet?" asked a courtier. "Because it's harmless," Marcus replied, taking a bite. "At least, that's what they think until they hide it in someone's chair." This time the laughter was genuine. Humor, Marcus knew, was a weapon that didn't look like one. The banquet continued for another hour, but Marcus was elsewhere. His hand resting casually on the table concealed a tiny control ring that pulsed once every few minutes. Each pulse triggered a different action across the palace. A relay slipping into place in the communication hub, a bypass seated into the shield controls, a small charge affixed discreetly near the royal quarters ventilation system. The Zorathi prided themselves on their security. Marcus was simply showing them how easily pride could be hollowed out. After the meal, Velrock suggested a tour of the palace. Marcus accepted, strolling alongside the prince through echoing corridors lined with artifacts from conquered worlds. He asked polite questions about their history, nodded at the right moments, even admired the craftsmanship on a ceremonial blade that had likely killed thousands. This, Velrock said, gesturing at a massive tapestry, depicts the subjugation of the Lyran worlds. It took 7 years and cost us. Too much, Marcus interrupted mildly, tracing the edge of the fabric with one finger. 7 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Velrock tilted his head. And yet here you are. Marcus smiled. Some grudges are worth the trouble. They reached the grand balcony overlooking the capital. The city spread beneath them in tiers of glittering lights and intersecting traffic streams. From this vantage, Marcus could see 3 of the 5 palace shield projectors. His mind ticked through angles, ranges, and lines of approach. You admire our city? Velrock asked. It's intricate, Marcus said. Like a web. But I found webs are only as strong as the spider holding them together. The prince chuckled, not realizing the analogy was more than decorative. Xor joined them, the bulk of his armor catching the balcony light. General Hale, he said, voice like gravel over steel, I'm curious. If Earth and the Empire went to war, how long would your people last? Marcus pretended to consider. Depends. How long can you hold your breath? Velrock laughed outright at that, clapping Xor on the shoulder. The Admiral's eyes stayed on Marcus, calculating. As they moved back inside, Marcus let his fingertips brush a decorative column, embedding a wafer-thin transmitter beneath the carved surface. By the time they reached the council antechamber, the transmitter was already syncing with his team's network. The tour ended with handshakes and parting courtesies. Marcus returned to his quarters, finding a sealed envelope on the desk. Inside was a single data crystal and a note in precise Zorathi script for your private consideration. No signature. He slipped the crystal into a reader, watching as data scrolled, a fragment of palace internal logs. Not the current day. Years-old records, heavily redacted, but enough to show troop movement orders on the day Station Vega was destroyed. Someone in this palace wanted him to know exactly which hands had carried out the command. He locked the file, then keyed his comm to a secure band. Status. A female voice, quiet and steady, replied in his ear. Relays in place. Comms will drop on your mark. Shield overrides at 70%. Keep it there, Marcus said. No sudden moves. Let them think they've still got the web. He poured himself a glass from the decanter, sat by the window, and looked out over the alien capital. The city pulsed like a living organism, every artery lit, every heartbeat visible. Somewhere down there, millions lived their lives under the illusion of unshakable order. Velrock thought this was a game of diplomacy. Xor thought it was a test of strength. Tvar, Marcus suspected, was the only one in the building who realized it was neither. He sipped his drink, letting the burn settle. In the back of his mind, the memory of 1204 came unbidden. Not the sound of gunfire, not the screams, just the silence that followed. On the street far below, a patrol skimmer paused at an intersection, its lights casting long shadows up the palace walls. Marcus watched it until it moved on. His comm pinged once, an unscheduled signal. He tapped the control ring, filtering the incoming message to his private display. For words appeared in crisp, anonymous text. They know you're here. Marcus read them twice, then closed the display. The city outside still glowed. The palace still hummed with life, but the air in the room felt subtly altered. The web was tightening. On him or around him, he couldn't yet tell. He set the glass down carefully, not because he was rattled, but because every move mattered now. The difference between predator and prey was timing. And Marcus Hale had never been good at waiting his turn. The council chamber smelled faintly of scorched stone and something sharp beneath it. Ozone, perhaps, from the shield emitters humming far above. Marcus Hale stood at the head of the oval table, his hands resting lightly on its smooth crystal surface. He looked as if he might be about to open a polite business meeting, not step into the center of a political minefield. Velrock entered last, swathed in the same shimmering robes as before, though the cut was subtly more martial. Admiral Xor shadowed him, helmet off now, eyes naked and harder for it. Advisor Tvar took his usual quiet seat to the side, the embodiment of watchfulness. Marcus waited until every chair was filled, until the hush in the chamber felt like a held breath. Then he smiled, warm, almost welcoming, and said, "Let's talk peace." The words dropped into the air like an invitation to a duel. Velrock gave a little tilt of his head, amused. "Peace, General Hale, begins with admission of fault. Are you prepared to admit Earth's?" Marcus's tone was honeyed. "I'm prepared to discuss mistakes. I've made a few myself, like trusting that a signed treaty means the killing stops." Murmurs from the gathered nobles. Xor leaned forward, elbows braced. "The Empire responds to aggression. Your colonies expanded into protected sectors." Marcus nodded as if conceding the point, then asked, "Protected from whom?" The question hung there, heavier than it looked. No one answered. He strolled along the length of the table, fingertips grazing its surface. "I've read your history. Empires love the word protection. It plays well in speeches, looks noble on banners. But where I come from, we have another word for it, extortion." That brought a flash of teeth from Xor. Velrock's eyes narrowed, but the prince still smiled, as though humor were armor. "You are bolder than I expected," Velrock said. Marcus glanced back at him. "I'm exactly as bold as you've earned." Tvar's voice cut in, low but clear. "General, are we to take this as an accusation?" Marcus stopped walking. "You can take it as observation. Accusations require proof. Observations only require eyes." The chamber tightened around that sentence. Every alien in the room felt a shift, the subtle change in air pressure when politeness begins to peel away. Velrock reclined in his chair. "Perhaps, then, we should speak plainly. Your wife was unfortunate collateral in an operation sanctioned by this court." The words were knives. Marcus's expression didn't change. He simply turned his head slightly, the way a man might do when adjusting to better hear a distant sound. "Collateral," he repeated. "Is that what you called the children, too? Or did they get a different label in the after-action report?" Velrock smirked, confident he'd found a seam. "I imagine you want vengeance. But vengeance is a luxury. You came here to save your people, not to die for your pride." Marcus's smile was thin now, honed to the edge of something sharper. "I came here because you made the mistake of thinking we scare easily." The court shifted. That smile was wrong now, too calm, too controlled. Xor rose from his chair, towering over the table. "You will show respect in this chamber, human." Marcus looked up at him, the picture of composure. "Respect's earned. You can't buy it with fear." Xor's hand twitched toward the weapon at his hip. He didn't get the chance to draw it. Marcus's hand shot forward, not striking, just resting on the Admiral's forearm in what could almost be mistaken for a friendly gesture. A second later, Xor's knees hit the floor, the result of a precise nerve compression that left his arm useless. Gasps rippled through the court. Marcus stepped back, adjusting his cuff as if he'd simply brushed off lint. "Now that I have your attention." Tvar's voice was the first to cut through the stunned silence. "You planned that." Marcus met his gaze. "I plan everything." He returned to his seat, folding his hands again. "Let's try this another way. You want peace? Fine. But peace has terms, and they're not written in your language alone." Velrock's smirk was gone now, replaced with a flat, assessing stare. "What are you proposing?" Marcus outlined them. On the surface, small concessions. Withdrawal from 2 contested sectors. An exchange of prisoners. Reduced patrols along a disputed corridor. To the untrained ear, they sounded almost trivial. But Tvar heard the weight beneath each one. He saw how those corridors connected to supply lines, how the sectors Marcus demanded would open routes that had been closed for decades. He understood that this was no concession. This was maneuver. Velrock, still underestimating, laughed softly. "You ask for scraps." Marcus's eyes locked on his. "Scraps feed the dog that bites you later." The prince's laughter died. The chamber doors opened briefly as a messenger stepped in, whispering something to one of the guards. Marcus didn't look, but he caught the faintest echo of bootsteps in the corridor beyond. heavier than ceremonial armor should sound. His people were moving. Velrock tried again to needle him. Your threats are empty without the means to enforce them. Marcus leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. You're right, which is why I've made sure enforcement is no longer my problem. Xor, recovering feeling in his arm, glared. Explain. I'd rather show you, Marcus said, glancing at the chrono embedded in the table. But not yet. Timing's everything. He rose, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch. Then he walked to the balcony doors, pushing them open to the alien daylight. The capital spread below, glittering and complacent. Without turning around, he said, Do you know what I like about cities? They think they're permanent. They grow roots, build monuments, tell themselves they'll last forever. But all it takes is a few well-placed cuts to turn arteries into open wounds. Velrock rose too, moving toward him. You speak as if you've done this before. Marcus's smile returned, smaller now, almost reflective. The trick isn't doing it. The trick is making them thank you for it until it's too late. He stepped back inside, letting the balcony doors swing shut behind him. I'll give you until tomorrow to decide if you want the easy way or the hard way. And if we choose neither, Velrock asked. Marcus walked past him toward the exit. Then you'll find out why humans don't make good pets. The guards shifted uneasily as he left the chamber. Tvar's gaze followed him all the way to the doors, the faint crease between his eyes deepening. He understood now. This wasn't a man bluffing for leverage. This was a man walking the length of a fuse. Back in his quarters, Marcus keyed the control ring twice. Somewhere beneath the palace, a relay locked into place. In the spaceport, a maintenance crew finished its work on a seemingly minor power coupling. In the comms tower, a technician replaced a crystal that wasn't broken. Every piece was ready. He poured a drink, stood at the window, and watched the city's pulse. He thought of 1204. He thought of his wife's voice, the way she used to hum under her breath when she cooked, the habit of tucking a strand of hair behind her ear before speaking. He thought about how all of that had been reduced to a line item in a military report. Velrock believed tomorrow's meeting would be another round of negotiation. Xor believed it would be a test of wills. Tvar, Marcus suspected, believed it would be the end of something far larger. The comm on his desk chirped a single tone. He crossed the room, pressed the receive key. A voice, crisp and without preamble, said, Phase 2 can be initiated on your word. Marcus looked out at the city one last time, the lights like stars trapped in glass. He let the silence stretch until it felt deliberate. Not yet, he said. I want them to sleep thinking they've won. He cut the connection. The hum of the room settling back into quiet. His reflection in the window looked calm, almost relaxed. But the eyes, those gave him away. Somewhere in the depths of the palace, a clock was already ticking toward midnight. The palace glowed that night like a lantern in deep water. Layers of light poured from its windows, spilling onto the terrace gardens and marble promenades. The air carried the faint hum of shield generators and the more distant murmur of celebration. The final banquet was meant to be a symbolic gesture, an outward show that peace had been secured. Nobles and military leaders crowded the grand hall, dressed in robes that shimmered like oil on water. Music threaded through the air, alien harmonics that pulsed in the bones more than the ears. Marcus Hale entered without hurry, dressed in a dark suit tailored to alien expectations, but still human in cut, subtle enough to pass, distinct enough to remind them he wasn't theirs. His expression was the same as always, genial, faintly amused, perfectly controlled. Velrock intercepted him near the entrance, his tone dripping with satisfaction. General Hale, tonight we toast to the end of hostilities. Marcus inclined his head. Then by all means let's drink. He allowed himself to be led toward the dais, where the emperor and his family presided. Xor stood to one side, watching with that heavy predator stillness. Tvar was there too, the only one whose gaze seemed to strip the room of its pageantry and see the scaffolding beneath. The first toast went to mutual understanding. The second to lasting friendship. Marcus raised his glass each time, the smile never faltering. By the third toast, the signal he'd been waiting for came. 3 tiny pulses through the control ring on his finger. His team was in position. The crystal chandeliers above flickered once, barely noticeable. At the far end of the hall, a servant tray tilted just enough to scatter a few glasses, drawing a knot of guards to the spill. The music stumbled, recovered. Marcus stepped forward to make his own toast. "To the future," he said, his voice carrying in the peculiar acoustics. "May it be as memorable as the past." He drank, set the glass down, and let his hand drift casually to the rail of the dais, pressing the hidden trigger embedded there hours ago. The change was immediate but quiet. The air lost its faint metallic tang as the shield's ionic field collapsed. Comms channels scrambled. Emergency redundancies flickered to life and died before they could stabilize. Across the city, lights winked out block by block. In the spaceport, docking clamps disengaged on ships that didn't have clearance to leave. In the palace's ventilation system, canisters released a harmless mist to humans, but one that clouded Zorathi's senses, turning edges soft and distances unreliable. Marcus could feel it in the way the nobles shifted, disoriented. Velrock frowned. "What's?" "Probably just a Tuesday," Marcus said mildly, cutting him off. From the shadows near the doors, the first of his operatives slipped in, dressed like palace staff, but moving with a precision that marked them as something else entirely. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. Marcus moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, pausing here and there to exchange a polite word, a handshake, a nod, each a cover for passing a coded signal or guiding someone subtly into position. Near the high table, he accidentally spilled a splash of wine onto Velrock's sleeve. "My apologies," Marcus said, reaching out with a cloth. His hand brushed the prince's wrist for less than a heartbeat, leaving behind a contact-based toxin so fast-acting the skin beneath would be numb before the prince finished blinking. Velrock's smirk returned, unaware. "Careful, General, or I'll think you're trying to get me drunk." "I wouldn't dream of it," Marcus said, stepping away. The Emperor was mid-sentence when his voice faltered. He blinked, turned his head slightly as if trying to clear it. One by one, members of the royal family began to shift uncomfortably, their composure slipping. Tvar rose from his seat, his expression grim. "You've been planning this since the moment you arrived." Marcus met his eyes. "Since the moment you killed her." Around them, the hall's noise fractured, voices rising in confusion, the music halting again. Guards tried to coordinate, but found their comms dead. The palace's internal doors locked in sequence, sealing them in. Xor's voice boomed over the din. "What have you done?" Marcus turned toward him, still calm. Leveled the field. He didn't raise his voice, yet it carried. "You thought humans were soft, that we'd beg for scraps to keep breathing. You never asked what we'd do if we decided breathing wasn't enough." Somewhere far below, a low rumble rolled through the palace floor, his team securing the substructure. It was distant, but the timing was perfect. Velrock tried to stand, but the toxin had begun its work. His words slurred, his weight shifting unsteadily. Marcus caught his arm, steadying him just enough to keep him from collapsing in front of the court. "Easy," Marcus murmured, almost kindly. "Wouldn't want you to make a scene." The Emperor was on his feet now, fury and confusion warring in his eyes. "This is an act of war." Marcus stepped closer, so only the Emperor could hear. "You declared that when you signed the order for Vega. Tonight is just the paperwork catching up." Tvar stood very still, his gaze fixed on Marcus, as if memorizing the shape of this moment. "They will come for you," he said quietly. "They'll have to get in line," Marcus replied. Another signal pulsed through his ring. Exfil teams in place, extraction corridors secure. The city was still largely in the dark, its defenses fragmented. The palace was his. Marcus looked out over the assembled court. "You have 2 choices. You can watch your empire's heart stop beating tonight, or you can let me walk out of here with my people and the prisoners you've been pretending don't exist." Xor took a step forward, but one of Marcus's operatives appeared at his flank, weapon barely visible beneath a servant's tray. The admiral froze, nostrils flaring. "No speeches," Marcus said, his voice harder now. "Decide." The emperor's jaw tightened. His gaze flicked to Tvar, who gave the smallest of nods. "Release them," the emperor said, the words tasting like acid. A ripple moved through the hall, as guards hesitated, then obeyed. Marcus let the silence hold a moment longer, the weight of the decision settling over them. Then he stepped back toward the main doors, his operatives closing in subtly around him. Velrock swayed in place, his eyes clouded. "You won't get far," he managed. Marcus paused in the doorway, glancing back over his shoulder. "Far enough." And then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "You should get that arm checked. Could be nothing. Could be everything." He left them standing in their own uncertainty, the hum of the palace systems struggling to restart around the edges of the blackout. Outside, the night air was cooler, the city still flickering with sporadic outages. The extraction skimmer waited at the edge of the garden terrace, its lights off, its engines low. Marcus climbed in, the hatch sealing behind him. The operatives followed, two carrying a small secured case that could have been anything: intel, leverage, a future war in a box. As the skimmer lifted, Marcus looked back at the palace. From this angle, it no longer looked invincible. It looked temporary. One of his team broke the quiet. "Orders, sir?" Marcus kept his eyes on the shrinking spires. "Broadcast the message. They wanted peace. They've got it. But now they know what it costs." The skimmer banked toward the dark horizon. Far behind, in the grand hall, Velrock finally collapsed into his chair, the numbness crawling up his arm. The emperor stared at the sealed doors, the taste of concession thick in his mouth. Tvar stood very still, watching the shadows where Marcus Hale had been. And in the palace's sealed council chamber, a small device no larger than a coin continued to blink, unseen, counting down to something no one had noticed yet. 3 hours. Then the real message would arrive.